At some point in your life, you understood something that changed everything. You understood that you are going to die. Not in an abstract way, not as a concept you heard about, but personally, specifically, unavoidably. You, one day, gone. And when that realization hit you, something shifted. You felt it in your chest, a strange heaviness that no other thought produces, a weight that has no physical source. But here's the question no one asks. When did that happen for the first time? Not for you personally, for humanity. When did the first human being on this planet look at another human being and understand, for the first time in the history of life on Earth, that they were going to die? Because that moment happened, somewhere, to someone, and everything that followed, your religion, your ambition, your fear of the dark, your need to be remembered, traces back to that single, silent realization in a mind that had never thought it before. This is the story of that moment. For most of life's history on Earth, death existed but was not understood. Animals die, insects die, every living thing dies. But understanding death, anticipating your own non-existence before it happens, that requires something most creatures do not have. It requires a mind that can project itself into the future, a mind that can imagine a version of tomorrow in which it no longer exists. Neuroscientist Antonio Damasio at the University of Southern California has spent decades studying consciousness and self-awareness. His research suggests that the awareness of mortality requires what he calls an autobiographical self, the ability to place yourself as a continuous character in a story that has a past, a present, and a future. Most animals live almost entirely in the present. They react, they survive, they do not narrate. Your ancestors were different. Slowly, over hundreds of thousands of years, the human brain developed the capacity to simulate futures, to run mental movies of events that had not yet happened, to plan, to anticipate, to imagine. And at some point, that same capacity turned inward, and the simulation it ran was of a future without the self in it. Anthropologist Ernest Becker called this the central problem of human existence. In his landmark 1973 book, The Denial of Death, he argued that everything humans do, every culture, every religion, every monument, every ambition, is ultimately a response to this one unbearable awareness. The awareness that you are a creature who knows it will die. But when did this awareness first appear? The fossil record cannot show us thoughts. You cannot dig up a mind, but you can dig up behavior. And what archaeologists have found buried in the earth across multiple continents tells a story that is both ancient and deeply familiar. The earliest known deliberate burials date to somewhere between 100,000 and 300,000 years ago. In a cave system in South Africa called Rising Star, paleoanthropologist Lee Berger and his team made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the scientific community. Deep inside narrow cave passages in chambers where no predator could reach, they found the remains of Homo naledi, a small-brained human ancestor that most scientists had assumed lacked the cognitive complexity for symbolic behavior. But the bodies were not scattered. They were placed, deliberately, in specific positions, in a location that required effort and intention to reach. This was not an accident. This was not predator activity. Something that looked remarkably like burial was happening in the minds and hands of a species we had assumed was too primitive to understand death. What does it take to bury someone? Think about it. You have to understand that the person is gone. You have to feel that their body still matters even though they can no longer feel it. You have to perform an action that has no survival value, no food, no shelter, no immediate benefit, based entirely on an internal experience. Grief, loss, the understanding that something permanent has happened. You cannot bury someone without, in some sense, understanding that you too will one day need to be buried. In another location, the Cima de los Huesos, the pit of bones in northern Spain, researchers found the skeletal remains of at least 28 individuals deliberately deposited in a deep shaft around 430,000 years ago. These were not modern humans. These were Homo heidelbergensis, our ancestors from before the split between modern humans and Neanderthals. And yet, there they were, placed, gathered, remembered. Neanderthals, the species most closely related to modern humans before their extinction around 40,000 years ago, buried their dead with what appears to be intention. Some Neanderthal burial sites contain flower pollen, suggesting flowers were placed on the body. Others show red ochre pigment around the remains. In Shanidar Cave in Iraq, researcher Ralph Solecki spent years excavating Neanderthal burials and found evidence suggesting these beings did not simply dump their dead. They marked them. They honored them. Something in them understood that what had happened was significant. Something in them responded to death not with indifference, but with ceremony. But here is what makes all of this staggering. These beings, Homo naledi, Homo heidelbergensis, the Neanderthals at Shanidar, were not writing philosophy. They had no language as complex as yours. They had no concept of heaven, no organized religion, no priests to guide the ritual. They were responding to death with the tools they had, their hands, their bodies, their presence, because something inside them could not simply walk away. That something is the same thing inside you right now. The moment a human first understood death was not a sudden flash of insight on a sunny afternoon. It was slow, gradual, like a photograph developing in a dark room. First, the vague awareness that the one who was warm is now cold, that the one who moved no longer moves, that something has left permanently. And then, over generations, over thousands of years, that vague awareness sharpened into something unbearable and undeniable. I will die. 3 words, the most consequential thought in human history. Because once you know you will die, you cannot unknow it. And everything you do afterward is, in some way, a negotiation with that knowledge. You build things that will outlast you. You have children who carry something of you forward. You tell stories so that your name survives the silence. You create art on cave walls so that some trace of your existence persists after your body returns to the earth. Terror management theory, developed by psychologists Jeff Greenberg, Sheldon Solomon, and Tom Pyszczynski in the 1980s, proposes that much of human culture is essentially a defense mechanism against the awareness of death. Religion, nationalism, legacy, fame, artistic creation, all of these are ways the human mind attempts to transcend its own mortality, to exist beyond the biological limit, to matter in a way that death cannot erase. And it started in a cave, or a forest, or beside a river somewhere in Africa, with one being looking at another being who had stopped breathing, and feeling, for the first time in the history of life on Earth, a specific human weight of knowing that the same thing was coming for them. You carry that moment with you everywhere you go. It is in your ambitions. It is in your love. It is in the strange ache you feel when you look at old photographs or stand at the edge of something vast and beautiful and feel, briefly, both enormous and very small. The first human who understood they would die did not have words for what they felt, but you do. And maybe that is the most human thing of all. Not that we die, but that we know it, and we keep going anyway. At some point in your life, you understood something that changed everything. You understood that you are going to die. Now you know you were never the first.